Creative city, in essence, is an accessible and inclusive city. You cannot become or be a creative, truly creative city which is just for few, just catering for the needs of some parts of your society. Culture needs to be accessible to everybody. And what is important is that when we think about accessibility and inclusivity, it should not be a campaign. It should not be a project, something we do once and then boast about it. Inclusivity and accessibility are a mindset, the way we do things from the very early steps, very early phases. It should be embedded to everything we do, how we see culture, and how do we understand the basic human right for everybody in our society to be part of culture. If you think about accessibility and inclusivity, we need to take a broad look at this. We often think about people with disabilities, and this is so important. People with disabilities. Whether this is a physical access to culture, meaning the way we prepare our rooms, our spaces, our venues for people to go in, whether you are a blind person or you are a deaf person or you are a person in a wheelchair. So we need to think about those issues. Often what we see in the institutions is that the accessibility is equal with a ramp on the main door. So yes, indeed, a person in a wheelchair can get into the building, but what happens then? How much of the venue in general accessible to people with barriers to movement? Can they take part of the activities in the room, in the venue? Can they access to different places, etc., etc.? So it's not just about getting in the main door. But my point is that it's not just about that. It's about also the content, not just the physical room. What about our materials, our documentations? Can they be read by a blind person? The movie programs, are there the translations for the blind people, the descriptive translations? Even if you do all of that, if your places, if your venues are accessible for people with special needs, and if your materials that you provide are accessible, how do they actually get there? What are your channels for communication? I hear sometimes people saying, oh, to make those opportunities available for people with disabilities, it costs a lot of money. And there are not many people with disabilities that come and visit us. Well, this is a chicken and the egg situation. Of course, if you have never been accessible, or not just you, but if people with disabilities are used to those venues not being accessible to them, how do you expect them to come to you? So indeed, it is not the people with disabilities that need to make the first steps. It is us in the cultural sector. So we need to know, who do we work with? Who do we cooperate with? Do we have a long-term relationship with associations for the people with special needs, for example? Do we audit our venues? Do we audit, for example, our communication materials? Are we sure that our website is accessible for people with special needs, for example? So there are many questions that are linked to the accessibility. When we think about accessibility, it's not just we do not just talk about people with disabilities. We talk about people with special needs. Now, what's the difference? Who are people with special needs? Well, everybody, almost everybody, has a special need, at least at one or another moment in their lives. There are people, for example, older, so elderly people, with restricted movement or wearing glasses or hearing aids. They're young people, they're children, they're parents who have to come and visit your events or a museum with a baby stroller. It is a healthy grown-up person who has just broken his leg and has to walk with crutches for a month. That's what we call a temporary special need. So when we design our events, when we design our communication, when we design our venues, it is not just the few that we have to think about and think, oh, but we don't have many of them in our community, should we make an effort? No, I think it is important to realize that we need to do this for everybody. And when we talk about people with special needs, it's not just about being old or being young or having an illness, but it's also different types of criteria that we need to take into account. For example, many events, many tickets for museums or theaters or concerts are becoming more and more expensive. What about those people, those children, or those families with less opportunities financially to come and take part of creative industries or cultural offer? What do we do there? Do we have special measures in place to support people in economic dire situation, or children from orphanages, for example? Do we have days in a month or a year which all our institutions are for free? For example, when it is becoming quite natural nowadays that a person in a wheelchair or a person with a disability could come and visit your event for free or with reduced price, that's very good. But what about a person that accompanies that person, that helps to push the wheelchair? Do they have to pay the full price or a half price, or is it for free? So these are the kind of questions, and it's not just about that. What about linguistic barriers? What about people that do not speak your main language of the place? Europe has currently a huge influx of Ukrainian refugees. Do we make special effort to get people from Ukrainian descent or people that do not speak our language? And do we make a special effort to feel them welcoming? Do we precisely design our communication that our messages reach those target groups as well that might not be in our usual information field? I would absolutely recommend to pay attention to an excellent material produced already some years ago, but it is constantly being updated, prepared in Finland. It's called Culture for All Framework. Culture for All Framework gives us tools, not just organizing more inclusive events, looking at the way that our events are designed, our communication is designed, our venues are prepared from the entire value chain, from home to our event. But not just that, it is also an excellent framework as a checklist. So there's a clear way of analyzing, of assessing your venue, your event, or your institutions and its readiness to offer more inclusive, more engaging, and more accessible cultural offer for everyone.